Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol neh bidbarei.
Amen.
Amen. L'chaim.
L'chaim, everyone.
L'chaim.
Good tavach.
Thank you.
Shavua tov. And all wonderful, good things for the forthcoming week. A new week, new life. And of course, where do we get our life from? The Parsha of the week. It gives us life. Baruch Hashem. I think that's what everybody's here, right? Which is amazing, wonderful, interesting. Okay. Oh. Okay. So, last week's Torah portion ends with Abraham bringing his son Yitzchak as an offering. Which incidentally, if you're very careful in the reading, and as Rashi points out, God says, Alehu al Ahar, ascend him on the mountain, which is a similar term about bringing an offering, but it just means to ascend. And of course, he understood it to mean to bring him as an offering, which was exactly what God wanted, that he should understand it in such a manner to see what would happen. And we know the story, of course. But he realizes, oh my gosh, after that, and with his wife Sarah passing away at the beginning of the parsha of this week's Torah portion, that I better get him married. It was a close call. After all, he is the progenitor of the Jewish people. It's not going to be Ishmael, as God says, listen to Sarah and everything that she says to you concerning the future of the Jewish people. And he has to get him married. After all, he wasn't a young man. He was already 40 years old at this point. So Avram doesn't want that his bride-to-be should be from the locals. Remember, he's living in Canaan now. He's living in what will become the Holy Land, the land that's promised to his descendants, but not through there. Even though many of them have embraced monotheism through his teachings, through his influence, but he doesn't consider them worthy. So he entrusts Eliezer, his servant, close confidant, with the mission. Let's get right into it. Let us share over here. Okay. Give me a moment here. Okay. You see it on your screen? Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So the verse says, I will have you swear to Eliezer, he's making him swear, by God, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not take a woman for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. This next verse, verse 4, rather travel to my land and my birthplace right? Not in the land of Canaan, but Mesopotamia, beyond the Euphrates, right, which is his birthplace, and take a wife for my son Isaac from there. Clear, right? Take note, he says, the God of heaven and earth. Okay. Story continues. Eliezer needs clarification. What if the woman refuses to come? In other words, she wants to live in her, with her family. She doesn't want to come to live with his family. Can I bring your son there? Can I bring Isaac, Yitzchak there? Right? Again, God of heaven and earth. That's in verse number 3. So now he says to him in his response, God, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home, in the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and promised to give this land to my children, will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. Note, God of heaven only, right? See, it says here, God of heaven. In verse number 3, when he first assigns the mission, here he brings greater clarification to the mission, but when he first assigns the mission, it's God of heaven and earth. Here it's the God of heaven. What is Avram doing over here? He is reassuring Eliezer that Yitzchak is not leaving the land of Israel. And, he doesn't. He just says, no, you will surely be successful and you will come here and bring the bride here. Because clearly it's the faith of Avraham that God promised the Holy Land to his children, and therefore they are not to leave. Simple so far, right? Let's take a look at Rashi on this verse. So, God, the God of heaven, remember, Avram is speaking here to Eliezer, to tell him that God, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and promised to give this land to my children, right? Okay, you'll be successful. Don't worry. I have faith. You don't have to return Yitzchak there. Okay. So let's take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says on the verse, God and the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home. That is quoting from the verse, right? That's the quotation from the verse, right? Clear. But Avram did not add the words and the God of earth, as he did in verse number 3. Whereas early in verse 3, he did say, and I will have you swear, right? Didn't add him. So continues Rashi, and he says, Avram told Eliezer, today he is the God of heaven and earth because I have made him familiar in people's lexicon. However, when he took me out from my father's home, he was only the God of heaven, not of earth, because humanity had not yet recognized him, and his name was not popular on earth. Okay, it wouldn't be so difficult to understand on the surface. What is Rashi coming to teach us? The distinction in the language from verse 3 to verse 7. Verse 3 he says, that the God of heaven and earth. And now he only says he's the God of heaven. Right? In other words, when I was in my father's home, in this verse, he says, I left, he left there. He didn't spend that much. I mean, he spent time there and he did influence, but he didn't influence sufficiently that God was not something that people were, conducted their behavior or they mentioned God back home in Mesopotamia, across the Euphrates, Iran, Iraq today. But here, right, where he's living in Canaan, where he's been here now for over 50 years. It's over 50 years, about 50, almost, it's about 55 years that he is, right? Yitzhak is 40 now. He had him when he was 100, so he's 140. He came when he was 75, so about 65 years. So he's had influence. And now there are people that are familiar with God. Is that clear? Any questions?
So far, so good.
Amazing. Actually, it's not so amazing. I was hoping you'd have some questions. I hope you'd be not satisfied. But that's okay. This is a little different one. This is a little more difficult to be not satisfied. Because now we're going to learn the Rebbe's questions on the Sikha. We're going to have a few questions over here. In the original talk, the Rebbe had 10 questions. But I'm not going to go through the 10 questions because you might not get out from under the rubble. I don't know if I would get out from under the rubble. Okay. Now, what is Rashi coming to explain? Follow carefully, folks. Okay, this is going to take a little more thinking here than your average bear. Okay, so what is Rashi coming to explain over here? The difference between the language in our verse, it says only the God of heaven, and in verse number 3, when he first spoke to Eliezer, the God of heaven and earth, right? Well, if that's the case, then look what Rashi quotes, God of and the God of heaven, who took me out of my father's home. Well, why are you quoting from the verse from my father's home? What's that got to do with anything? Right? That's not the point. The point is in the distinction of the terminology here in reference to God. One point he's referring to God as God of heaven and earth, verse 3, and here only the God of heaven. Okay, so just bring down God and the God of heaven. Why do you have to say that, who took me out of my father's home? Remember the Rebbe, every word is precise in Rashi. There's nothing extra. So why does Rashi say that? First question. Okay. So now what does it say? So Rashi begins, but Avram did not add the words and the God of, whereas earlier, if he was coming to explain the discrepancy, so come and explain the discrepancy. It sounds like he wants to make a different point over here. Furthermore, why is the verse why is Rashi saying that Avraham told Eliezer, today he is, look, at the bottom of today he is the God of heaven and earth, because I made him familiar with in people's lexicon, right? However, when he took me from my father's home, he was only the God of heaven. Why the whole history? If you want to explain the distinction and the discrepancy of the anomaly in the term, so why are you giving a history lesson over here? Limit yourself to the simple meaning of the verse, right? Of what he's trying to say. Okay. So the Rebbe is of the mind that Rashi's not coming to try to understand why a distinction in the terminology that Avram is using, but he's actually coming to answer what we call a klotz kasha, a simple question that maybe we didn't think of, and the 5-year-old is bothered by. What is that simple, obvious question? It's as follows. Avram says like this: I want a bride that comes from my family, right? Where I come from, Mesopotamia, across the Euphrates, right? Why? Because in my family, the family, they possess fine character traits. It's his family, right? So Avram had considerable influence over the local populace, but they didn't have fine character traits, the local population of Canaan. Okay? Let's see. The Kli Yakar explains this. Oops, sorry. Oh my gosh, there we go. Okay. Because the genetic nature of parents is passed down to their children. This only concerns negative habits such as overeating, lust, greed, envy, that derive from our corporeal nature. But such traits are passed down to the next generation who emulate their forebears. Idol worship is different. This is a product of education, not genetic disposition. Therefore, Avram was wary of the Canaanites, who were lustful and succumbed to sins of passion though they refrained from idol worship. Yet he welcomed his relatives, whose only fault was idol worship. Listen carefully. Avram taught the Canaanite women about God, right? So they didn't worship idols, right? But that didn't change their genetic predisposition to the sins of passion that they had. Avram didn't want to have grandchildren that would inherit their genetic markers. Is that clear?
Yes.
So therefore, send over there and go take a bride from there. By contrast, his relatives in Haran, they were steeped in idol worship, right? But less predisposed to negative character quality. They were more refined in nature. Idol worship didn't concern Avram so much. Why? Because Avram felt that his future daughter-in-law could be educated to embrace monotheism. Is that clear?
Despite the fact that idol worship is greater than.
It's a greater sin, right? But it's something that you could learn. It's a behavioral, right? Right. You see that if parents are both very anxious people, and you see that parents are very obnoxious, there's a good chance the kids are going to be that way, right? That's a character quality. Is that clear? Now, So what's wrong with Haran? They're idol worshippers, right? But that's solvable. On the other hand, so he says it's solvable. Okay. How does they have good character quality? You can let in, thank you. They have good character quality, right? And idol worship and sin and behavior is solvable, right? So if that's the case, what's so bad about Yitzchak that he could live there? Why was it except? Sorry. Why is it then that the atmosphere is so bad for Yitzchak that he can go live there? Why is it okay for his wife to have grown up there? That's the question the 5-year-old has. Mamanav shach, either way you want to look at it. If you could educate, okay, then she could be educated, right? And if you can't educate, and if so, then let Yitzchak go there and live there. But if you can't, then why take someone from there? Right? That's the question that the 5-year-old has. And this is what he actually is answering Eliezer, right? He's actually answering Eliezer. How's he answering him? It's not about a discrepancy in the words. It's about the honorifics to God that seem to be out of place. In other words, Avram has said, God of heaven, and stop short of saying God of earth, right? If he wanted to praise God, then he would have completed the sentence and say God of earth, but it wasn't about praising God. That's what he intended to do here, right? So it turns out in the verse 3, God is saying God of heaven, God of earth, that these words could not be meant praise, but they're part of an oath that I will have you swear by God, the God of heaven and earth. In other words, an oath has a strict regulation to it, saying God of heaven and earth, right? It's not a flowery phrase about God. It's about a proper oath to God of heaven and earth, right? So in other words, it's not about praising God. You're making an oath to God. So you have to reference to God properly, right? Is that clear? So, okay, if that's the case, then what's so bad about bringing Yitzchak to Haran? And in the words of the Rebbe, Abraham adjusted his language. Earlier, he said God of heaven and earth, and now he says God of heaven. This discrepancy holds the answer to Eliezer's question. So it turns out the discrepancy is that Avram is not distinguishing between 2 times of discrepancy. Like, in other words, he's the God of heaven and earth here because I've taught people here, as opposed to there, right? Another time period that I didn't, earlier and later, then and now. Rather, what he's making is a distinction of 2 places, not 2 time periods, 2 places, Haran and Israel, here and there. God is familiar in Israel because of the extensive work that I've engaged in to influence people. God is unknown in Haran because I left Haran before I could gain much traction and really have proper influence. I don't want my son to live in Haran because God is still unfamiliar there. That's the point. Here in the Holy Land, people speak of God. It's a regular feature. In Haran, that's not the case. Now, of course, Avram understood that this line of reasoning would only make Eliezer wonder. If God is familiar among the people of Israel, why doesn't Avram want to select a daughter-in-law from the people here? So that's why Rashi proceeds to answer this, and he says, as the Rebbe explains, because it's a superficial change. I only made God familiar in the people's lexicon. They didn't change they changed their manner of speech. This did not change their habits and behavior. Before we said it was behavior, the Rebbe says no. Their behavior didn't really change. They spoke about God. They believed in God. It's like, as the Talmud tells us about a thief who's ready to go steal and he prays to God that he should be successful. Now, does he believe in God or doesn't believe in God? Well, yes and no. Because if you really believed in God, then you wouldn't steal. But yet he is praying to God. So here they change their lexicon. They're familiar. They speak about God and they say, Baruch Hashem, thank God. Yes, everything's wonderful. Yeah, but, they would still be uncouth. They would still have inappropriate habits and behaviors. They didn't serve idolatry, God forbid. But, is that clear? So in text 3, the people of Israel learned to speak of God, right? But their inborn traits are negative. And speaking of God didn't change them. It didn't change them. They were still greedy. They were still lustful. They were still, had cravings. Therefore, you can't take a daughter-in-law from me from here. Right? So my daughter-in-law has to come from Haran. Oh, well, yeah, but in Haran, they're idolaters. That's why you can't keep her there. That's why my son can't stay there. Because there is only a God of heaven. God did not come down to earth that they spoke about God in their daily language. Right? So they have, on the one hand, good character qualities, but they're unfamiliar with God. They still have idolatry, as the Rebbe explains. When Avram called out there in the name of God, the God of the world, God became God of the earth, or at least part of the lexicon on earth. However, this only began in Israel after God took Avram from his father's home. Before that time, God's name was not familiar on earth. So it follows that in his father's home, God remained as he had always been, a God of heaven, but not of earth. In that region, they did not recognize God, and his name was uncommon among them. So Avram did not want his children to live among people who did not know God and not speak about God. Yet, he wanted a daughter-in-law from there because the character quality would be of a good nature. And even though there's a bad education, the education can be uprooted and can change that. Right?
But it cannot be uprooted from the other people where it's in their like genetics per se.
They don't have that, right? They don't have that character quality. So let's go now back to the Rashi. Here. Here's Rashi. So we asked a question, Rashi, why does he say God of heaven, the God who took me from my father's home? If you're only trying to explain the distinction of, in this verse, it says only the God of heaven, and in verse number 7, and in verse number 3, it says God of heaven and earth, and just bring that part. Why are you saying took me from my father's home? Ah, because that's the point, right? They took me from my father's home. Rashi's purpose was only to explain why Avram didn't say the God of earth, right? Then if that's the only point, then you wouldn't need to say that, right? But now we understand Rashi's out to explain why Yitzchak can't live in Haran. Because God took me from there. And since he took me from there, there wasn't sufficient time for me to imbue that region with the idea that God is a God of earth. He's only a God of heaven, right? And therefore they were involved in idolatry. So remember, this is all coming to explain to Eliezer. Avram's coming to explain to Eliezer when he asks him the question, why can I take your son back to Haran if she doesn't want to leave Haran? And he's not just asking a question, he actually has an issue, like, why not? Right? You don't want from here because here you don't have the character quality. Oh, but there they do have character quality. So, okay, if they have character quality, so then I guess it's okay. They're okay. So that's why he says, no, 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 no. The God of heaven, that God that I was taken from there, the God of heaven who took me from there. So I left a place where God is only God of heaven. I didn't have enough time to influence the environment sufficiently. And therefore, no, 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 no. You can't take back over there, right? You can't take Yitzchak over there. He can't live there because they don't behave properly. And that's what he comes to explain over here. And then he says, but Avram did not add the words, and the God of earth, where he did earlier. And that's why he has to come and explain now. Avram told Eliezer to explain to him not only that he should not take his son there and make an offer to, that his son could go to Haran, but explaining to him why he can't do that. And that's why the history is important over here. Because today, God is a God of heaven and earth. That's only because here, I've been 65 years that I've been able to make that part of people's lexicon. Ah. So why are you going there? Hmm? That already he addressed earlier. Because I want you to take from my family, meaning family, the traits of my family are there. And therefore the traits of me and my family are there. That's a quality person, right? But to leave them there, that you can't do. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah, is it? Any questions before we continue? Okay. So what comes out something very intriguing is the value that Avram Avinu, of course, is giving to the Holy Land of Israel. Although the holiness of the land is not yet imbued, it's chosen land, but the holiness will only come after Yeshua brings the people into the land of Israel. But yet, there's something very special about it. So there's an interesting piece of Talmud. 1 second. Let me share an interesting piece of Talmud. This one, yeah, this one. Here it is. One should always reside in the land of Israel, even in a city mostly populated by non-Jews, rather than outside of Israel, even in a city mostly populated by Jews. As one who lives in the land of Israel is considered to have a God. One who lives outside of the land of Israel is considered not to have a God. So look at that. I'm sitting here in Montreal with no God. But my sisters are watching this who's living in Israel.
Weird.
What does this mean? How did we take this? So let's see the Abarbanel. She explains. The needs of every nation and city are overseen by respective angels and stars designated exclusively for them. Jewish people are not under the dominion of angels or stars. God oversees and provides for them by himself. Therefore, concerning other nations, God is called the God of gods. Concerning Jews, he is called the God or the God of Israel. This is because God provides for our other nations via intermediaries in a finite natural order. For them, God is a distant cause, a God of gods. For Jews, God provides directly without intermediaries and is therefore called God. I will be to them for a God, as it's in Jeremiah. I am God, your God. Right? Our sages similarly expounded on the passage when God gave nations their lot and separated the children of Adam. This occurred at, the Tower of Babel, when God divided the people into 70 nations and languages. 70 angels appeared before God to draw lots over the 70 nations. God's lot fell upon the people of Israel. The passage states, for God's people are his portion. The land of Israel has marvelous ability to receive the spark of the divine and to host a nation that is administered and attached directly to God without any intermediary. Other lands are unable to host and tolerate such intensive sanctity. It was therefore necessary that God give his chosen land to his nation, the land that he looks after constantly. His eyes are upon it. God tied his chosen people with him with a mighty continual bond, divine bond. Still here? Yeah. So that he could oversee his inhabitants directly and with detailed providence. This is not the case with the case with any other land. The history of the land attests to the continual sanctity. Adam and Eve were created and buried in this land. God directed Abraham to leave his homeland, to journey and reside in this land. The binding of Isaac also occurred in this land. Constant miracles that occur in the Holy Temple also took place in this land. The laws of sabbatical and jubilee during the ordinary produce, during which ordinary produce becomes sanctified, are exclusive to this land. Our sages thought that those who live outside the land of Israel are considered to have no God. This is because the land of Israel is not under the dominion of celestial ministers, but exclusively directed by God. Those who reside outside of Israel elect not to be administered by the esoteric providence, but by the providence of angels, thus our age is compared to idolatry. So what, right? So we learned this in Tanya, right? We had this in, if you recall, in Igeris HaKodesh, we had it in the letter, the 25th letter. We spoke about it at great length about how there's 70 nations and 70 angels, that they are the God of gods. They're getting a glimmer, and from there is a glimmer of light from God, right? And that's Klippa, and so on and so forth. So outside of Israel, the relationship with God is funneled through the celestial angels. Right? It's not direct. And therefore, that's why there's only one land. It's a holy land. Other lands are coming, their vitality from Klippa, right?
Sorry. So that does mean that the ministry, celestial ministers, ministering angels would be considered as idolatry, right?
And therefore, we get our vitality from Klippa, not direct from God. That's what it means. Very simple in that respect, right? Not direct, it's coming from Klippa. Okay. So what we have then what we have then in the land of Israel is God's providence is much more obvious and apparent. And so as the Barbanel brought from the times of the Holy Temple, the miracles that occurred, but we don't need to just go to the times of the Holy Temple. We can clearly see what's going on in Israel today. The miracles are abound today. 70 years ago, as Ben Gurion says, who was not exactly the most, greatest believer, but he was a believer. He says, you need to be practical in Israel, believing. It's a matter of practice and being practical to believe in the miracles because we depend on them. They're so clear and obvious. And there's no question that the war that's going on in Israel today, and that if this war would have been fought by any other nation, that, how devastating it would have been, any other nation fighting it. And the clear, open miracles that happen consistently. I was speaking to someone that, about that books need to be written about what's going on in Israel in the last 13 months. How amazing it is, and how many people are returning to their roots because they see clearly the open miracles that are happening in Israel. Now, of course, one soldier that is killed is one soldier too many. One person that's killed in Israel is one too many. But that being said, there's a great I don't know what the word is. It's just so clear. And that doesn't happen elsewhere. That doesn't happen elsewhere. Now, furthermore, to live a complete Jewish life, the only place you could do it is in Israel. Because there are 343 mitzvahs that are only applicable in the land of Israel. Sabbatical year, Trumas Ma'aser. I mean, many of those mitzvahs today, we can't fulfill them because we don't have a holy temple. So there are offerings to be brought and so on and so forth. But clearly the Holy Land is something very, is very special. If that's the case, then what am I doing here? And what's the rest of you doing here? What are the rest of you doing here? Why shouldn't we move to the land of Israel? Because God, there's another piece of Talmud that tells us that God did a favor to the Jewish people and he spread them throughout all the nations of the world. What was the favor? Wouldn't it be better to be in a cocoon, in a in a cocoon, and all living together in one place? Wouldn't that be better? So on a simple level, for those concerned with anti-Semitism, on that level, imagine all Jews were in one place 80 years ago in the Holocaust. It wouldn't have been 6 million in heaven for Fend. Could have been much worse even. Right. So God did a favor. He spread us throughout all the nations of the world. So there'll always be Jews. But that's a very superficial understanding. The deeper reason for this is because God did a kindness, not just for us, he did a kindness for the world. Because Jews need to be everywhere in the world. Because there's the famous story from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, when a chassid came to him with a fervent passion to go and make Aliyah to the Holy Land of Israel. He said, Machda Eretz Yisrael, make here Israel. In other words, we are obliged to, wherever we live, to make it holy. But we just had a previous teaching in the Talmud that, it's like we don't have a God. That's the whole point. Make it as if you got a God. And not just you have a God, but your environment is also living like they have a God. Right? That's what Avram Avinu did. He went and made it something that the word of God was on the lips of people. Now, Avram Avinu was at a disadvantage. What was his disadvantage? He was living before the giving of the Torah. And therefore, he couldn't really permeate the people from within, that it should be completely changing them. Only by the giving of Torah, Mount Sinai, and that's why every Jew became like a convert. Even Moses became a convert, because then what defines you was the Jewish soul, not observance, not commitment, not what you said, and not even the way you behave. But it was something that it's imbued in the very core of your being. That's what happened at Mount Sinai. Now that it's the very core of your being, even if you might not behave, you may not have the character quality so refined, but you have something much deeper. You're a Jew. You have a Jewish soul. So even though maybe, parents didn't exactly have the most sublime thoughts in conceiving the child, but it's a Jewish soul. And a Jewish soul, as we just learned over here about the land of Israel, is not dictated by the angel, directly from God. The Jewish soul is also not dictated from any other external quality, but directly from God. And therefore, the Jewish soul is capable of rising above whatever might be your natural inclination, your natural character quality, and to rise above that and to be able to behave, thought, speech, and action, to make here Israel, wherever you are, to be perfectly aligned with God and to bring the holiness that is not only in the land of Israel. And in the end, that's our duty. Because when Mashiach comes, he doesn't come only for the people in the land in Jerusalem, or just the people in the land of Israel. He's coming for all of people all over the world, and not just for Jewish people, but for all of humanity. And therefore we have the obligation, and wherever we are, is to be like Avram Avinu, to not just get people accustomed to say Baruch Hashem, but the truth is, when we get them accustomed to do it, really what they're doing is being aligned with their true inner neshama, their soul on the inside, that even though they may be a uncouth character quality. But that is not what defines them. Back then it defined you, but not today. It defines you as your neshama, and therefore you're able to rise up in any given occasion. And therefore, wherever we are, what we do is make Eretz Yisrael through our Torah and mitzvahs that we fulfill. And through that, then what we will do is create Eretz Yisrael, that Jerusalem, as the Talmud tells us, Jerusalem will stretch out through all the land of Israel. It'll all be the holy city. And Israel will stretch and be the entire world. Because the entire world will then be imbued with the holiness of Hashem in such a manner that God's presence will be palpable and real, that we will truly sense the presence of God in the smallest engagement and encounter, day in, day out. L'chaim, l'chaim. Any questions?
Wow.
Chaim.
We're clear.
Beautiful.
Everybody's so quiet.
First class. Thanks for that. Thanks.
Folks, a reminder
Thanks.
that Jewish life is best lived with chutzpah. Jewish life is best lived with chutzpah. And the chutzpah is starting right now. That wherever we are, we live in a way that we bring godliness where we are. That's the theme of our campaign, our matching campaign that will begin. I mean, it begins now. Some of you, I want to thank you that have already have matched and gone on to charity with a D.com/chutzpah / you can put for Rabbi Fine. And not only that you can give, and whatever you give will be matched, but more importantly, since we're all learners together, so I ask you to please get others to match others and inspire them that they should give. And whatever you have to explain to them that they need to appreciate, that whatever it might be, stand up, have chutzpah. And whoever can help with the campaign and make calls. So Wednesday, we're starting 10 a.m. here at Chabad Zichron, going throughout whole day Monday, whole day Thursday. And whoever can come here to help.
Wednesday, Rabbi.
Wednesday?
Wednesday,
Okay.
Thursday.
This is
Whoever
a
can come and help, please let me know when you can come.
This is Elise. I found one problem on the website.
What's that?
When you go to share the link, there's a place where you can click Facebook to share it on Facebook.
Right.
That link comes up. I put it in the chat. It's a dead link. It comes up as. Hold on. I'll tell you exactly what it comes up on.
Thank you. Okay, we'll check it out.
Yeah, it's the Facebook share. I don't know about the other ones, but I shared it by just copying the URL myself. But the share link didn't work.
But the link didn't work, but if you share the URL, okay, that's it. Okay. Share the URL, then it'll work. Got it.
After you make a donation,
Right.
there are all these little boxes, like you can share on X and you can share on Facebook. And the Facebook one came up as an error message. That's the issue.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, folks. God bless you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
God
you.
bless. Good tavach. Shavua tov. An amazing good
Shavua
week.
tov. Everybody have a good evening.
Divorce,